Man refuses to sit next to black woman on plane, ends up sitting alone on the tarmac. Have you ever witnessed a moment so tense, so electric with raw prejudice and defiance, that you could practically feel the air crackle around you? Picture this. A bustling airport terminal, the endless echo of announcements calling for final boarding, and then one passenger's refusal to share a row with another human being simply because of the color of her skin. In a split second, a mundane flight transforms into a moral battlefield, with onlookers caught in the crossfire of arrogance and conviction. What unfolds next is a roller coaster ride of drama, unexpected twists, and a brutal lesson in karma that no one saw coming. It was a late afternoon at John F. Kennedy International Airport, Terminal 4 to be exact, and Flight 487 on Delta Airlines was scheduled to depart for Los Angeles in about an hour. The hustle and bustle was as typical as ever. Family members hugging goodbye, friends snapping selfies before they parted ways, and the occasional tearful goodbye from a partner left behind. Among the crowd was Lucas Henderson, a man in his early 30s who sported a crisp business suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. Lucas was heading to Laos for what he considered a pivotal moment in his life, a high-stakes meeting that could secure him an executive role at a prominent tech firm in Silicon Valley. He couldn't afford to miss that meeting. Everything about his demeanor said he was used to being in control. The way he walked, the way he kept checking his watch, and the way he sighed loudly any time an airport announcement drowned out his thoughts. As he took a seat at the gate, Lucas surveyed the area. A father with twin toddlers who were screaming their hearts out tried to calm them with promises of candy. A newlywed couple sat entwined in each other's arms, too caught up in marital bliss to notice the stress that traveling can bring. In the corner, an older woman in a floral print dress was knitting something that looked like a scarf, the rhythmic click of her needles acting as a strangely calming metronome. Then, a few seats away from Lucas, sat Alicia Carter, dressed casually in jeans, a cozy sweater, and white sneakers. Alysia had short, natural black hair and a bright smile. She was a pediatric nurse heading to Laos for a medical conference, one she had been looking forward to for months. She had saved up her vacation days and even rearranged her schedule to make this trip happen. Alysia was reading a thick hardcover book on child psychology, pausing every few pages to jot down notes in the margins. Occasionally, Lucas glanced over at Alicia, but he didn't pay her much attention, just another passenger on the same flight. Yet, something about her calm, focused demeanor made him restless. Perhaps it was because he himself was anxious inside. Perhaps he resented her composure in contrast to his growing impatience. The boarding call was imminent, but for now, they were all stuck in that universal waiting game, shifting restlessly in uncomfortable airport seats, phone batteries draining by the minute. When the first boarding group was called, Lucas shot up from his seat. Though he wasn't in first class, he loitered near the gate in hopes of sliding in early. He believed his job interview in Los Angeles was more important than anyone else's plans, and if that meant bending rules, so be it. He had no problem with that. Yet, the gate attendant gently reminded him that his boarding group hadn't been called yet. Frustrated, Lucas stepped aside, but he lingered at the front, ignoring the daggers. Some of the other waiting passengers threw him for blocking their path. Alicia, oblivious to Lucas's agitation, stepped forward when her zone was finally announced. Coincidentally, they ended up in the same line. Alicia gave a polite nod and a half smile to Lucas, the kind of polite acknowledgement travelers exchange when stuck in a queue together. Lucas barely responded, an annoyed half glance. If Alicia noticed, she didn't let it bother her. She turned her attention back to her phone, checking last-minute emails. At last, they both managed to board through the jet bridge and into the aircraft, a Boeing 737. The flight attendants were greeting passengers with standard pleasantries, occasionally reminding everyone to keep the aisle clear. The interior of the plane bustled with overhead bin maneuvers, the squeaks of luggage wheels, and the hush of seat belts clicking into place. Lucas found his seat, 17B, an aisle seat, which he preferred for quick exits. Alicia, scanning her ticket, found she was assigned to 17C, the middle seat, right next to Lucas. She took a moment to place her backpack into the overhead compartment before carefully lowering herself into the seat, her hardcover book resting on her lap. "Excuse me," she said softly as she navigated past Lucas's legs. "I'm right here." Lucas barely moved, forcing Alicia to sidle past him in a tight space. Still, she was polite. "Thank you," she murmured after she finally settled. Lucas stiffened, his eyes flickering over Alicia, noticing she was a young black woman. He gave a half smile that was more a grimace than anything else. Once again, if Alicia picked up on it, she showed no sign. The aircraft continued to fill with passengers, overhead bins snapping shut as flight attendants rushed to help. The air had that familiar airplane scent, a mix of recycled oxygen, the tang of antiseptic cleaning solutions, and a hint of stale coffee. Lucas felt stifled, not just physically, but mentally. His mind was back on that all-important meeting. If something delayed the flight, if he missed his connection to a pre-meeting event, the possibilities gnawed at him. As more passengers took their seats, Alicia took out her book, intending to read a few more pages before takeoff. She was mindful to keep her elbows tucked in because she could sense Lucas's annoyance. In the row across the aisle, an older man was assisting his wife with her seat belt. Next to them, a flight attendant carefully placed a bulging duffel bag into an overhead bin. When the flight attendant, a neatly dressed woman with a name tag that read Rebecca, asked if everyone in the row was comfortable, Alicia smiled and said she was fine. Lucas, on the other hand, rolled his eyes. Something about sitting next to Alicia seemed to unnerve him. Perhaps it was a deeply ingrained prejudice he had never confronted, or maybe it was just an unwillingness to share personal space with anyone he deemed beneath him. His posture grew rigid and a sneer curled his lip. At that moment, Alicia thought maybe he was just another stressed businessman with more on his plate than he could handle gracefully. She went back to her reading, deciding to ignore the tension radiating off him. Then it happened. Lucas signaled for a flight attendant. His hand shot up in the air as though he were summoning a servant. He kept checking over his shoulder as if scanning for anyone else who might come to help him faster. Rebecca approached, her smile still polite but clearly fraying at the edges after dealing with multiple impatient passengers. "Sir, can I help you?" "Yes," Lucas began in a hushed voice that still managed to carry a tone of righteous indignation. "I want to change seats." Rebecca looked down at her tablet, already checking for seat availability. "Let me see what's open. Would you mind telling me the reason for your request?" He leaned in closer to her, trying to keep it discreet. "I just don't want to sit next to," he hesitated, shooting a glance at Alicia. "I don't want to sit next to her." "Can I please move?" Rebecca blinked, not sure she heard him correctly. "I'm sorry, sir. Did something happen? Is there a medical need or a personal situation we should be aware of?" Lucas cleared his throat. "I'm not comfortable sitting here. I'm a frequent flyer. I have important business, and I just can't." From Alicia's side, she couldn't ignore the conversation anymore. She didn't catch every word, but she heard enough to suspect she was the problem. Her heart sank. She'd experienced racist encounters before, but not usually so blatant, and in such a cramped public setting. Her mind raced. Should she say something? Should she stay quiet? Rebecca frowned, then stepped back to consult her tablet. Seats were nearly fully booked, especially the ones near the front. Only a couple of middle seats in the very back of the plane were available. "Sir, the only seats available are in the last row, near the restrooms. We can move you there if that suits you. Lucas pursed his lips. A seat in the back row was definitely not an upgrade. He considered forcing Alysia to move, but even in his obliviousness, he knew that might cause an uproar. He glared at Alicia, who locked eyes with him for the first time. There was a steely resolve in her gaze, like someone who'd spent her life brushing off slights big and small. She quickly returned to her reading, though her eyes were no longer focusing on the words. Finally, Lucas turned back to Rebecca. Fine, if that's all you have, then do it. Rebecca guided Lucas to the back row, seat 29D, sandwiched next to the lavatory. It was a notoriously uncomfortable seat, with limited recline and constant foot traffic from passengers heading to the restroom. As Lucas lugged his briefcase to the back, he felt the curious stares of multiple onlookers. A few seemed to guess the reason for his seat change, shaking their heads in disapproval. Alicia, meanwhile, exhaled quietly. She tried to refocus on her book, but her thoughts were racing. The sting of being singled out because of her skin color, so open, so matter-of-fact, gnawed at her. While she was relieved he'd moved, the hatred behind his gesture cast a pall over what should have been just a normal flight. The commotion delayed departure a bit as the flight attendants rechecked seat assignments and overhead bin space. Eventually the cabin doors closed, and the pilot, Captain Ron Davies, announced their taxi from the gate would commence shortly. The plane's engines roared to life, and Alicia put aside the negativity for a moment, letting the hum of the plane lull her into a calmer mindset. No sooner had the plane climbed to cruising altitude than the seatbelt sign turned off, and flight attendants began rolling beverage carts down the narrow aisle. From seat 29D, Lucas could see glimpses of Alicia's row whenever the line of sight was clear. He was fuming. His seat was cramped. The overhead bin was already full. His briefcase had to be jammed under the seat in front of him, leaving him no legroom. Worst of all, each time the restroom door swung open, he got a face full of that stale toilet odor. It was demeaning, he thought. A man of his stature relegated to the back of the plane, and all because of one inconvenience. The seatbelt sign flicked back on briefly when the aircraft encountered minor turbulence and the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a little bumpiness ahead. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened. The beverage service paused, leaving Lucas with half a cup of lukewarm coffee. Alicia, up front, had politely declined a drink, choosing instead to keep to herself. The turbulence worsened for a few minutes, jolting the plane. A few gasps echoed as overhead bins rattled. Lucas gripped his armrests, annoyed that his coffee threatened to spill. Alicia's heart pounded, but she'd flown enough times to know turbulence usually passed. She said a silent prayer, feeling the plane dip and sway in the choppy air. Just as quickly as it began, the aircraft leveled out and the seatbelt sign winked off again. Minutes later, the pilot's voice returned over the intercom, but this time there was an edge to his tone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have an issue with one of our fuel indicators, and as a precaution, we're going to make an unscheduled stop in Street Louis. There's no immediate danger, but we want to ensure we're flying as safely as possible. Groans rippled through the cabin. Some passengers cursed under their breath. Others anxiously looked for flight attendants to reassure them. Alicia closed her book, thinking of her connecting schedule. Lucas was outraged. Another delay was the last thing he needed. He muttered a curse, glaring at the back of seats, as if the entire plane conspired against him. The plane began its descent into Street Louis Lambert International Airport. The flight attendants asked everyone to power down large electronics and prepare for landing. Alicia stared out the window, watching the clouds part to reveal the patchwork of city lights below. She prayed the problem would be fixed quickly, so she could still make it to La in time for her conference sessions. Lucas simply seethed. Upon landing, the pilot taxied the plane to a remote gate, away from the main terminals. "We should only be on the ground for about an hour," Captain Davies assured them, though he admitted the exact timing would depend on how quickly maintenance could address the issue. Once the plane stopped, flight attendants allowed passengers to use the aisles, but requested they stay in the aircraft. The air conditioning seemed to wane, leaving everyone feeling stuffy and irritable. Lucas stood up, collecting his briefcase. He had an idea. Perhaps he could pull rank by making a scene, ensuring he'd get rebooked on another flight or seat upgraded. As if on cue, he stepped into the aisle and marched toward the front of the plane. Alicia noticed him coming, though she tried not to meet his gaze. His expression was stormy, his jaw set. He stopped where the flight attendants were congregated near the galley, discussing the next steps with the pilot on the phone. "I need to get off this plane," Lucas demanded. "I have an important business meeting, and I can't waste time on this nonsense." Rebecca, the flight attendant who had dealt with Lucas earlier, sighed. "Sir, we do understand the inconvenience, but regulations require that unless maintenance and the airline decide otherwise, we remain on board during this inspection." He glanced at the open door leading to the stairway. The jet bridge was not connected because they were at a remote gate. Lucas saw a ground crew worker outside, along with the plane's maintenance team. "I can't just stay put," Lucas insisted. "If there's a possibility I can get another flight, I need to try." "Sir, please remain seated until we have more information," Rebecca repeated, as politely as she could manage, though her tone was becoming firmer. Lucas rolled his eyes and turned back to his seat in the rear of the plane. On his way, he stared at Alysia. She pretended not to notice, but she could sense his anger emanating like a toxic aura. Part of her wanted to reassure him that she wasn't the cause of all his problems. But another part was tired of having to soothe people who held irrational biases. So she held her peace. Maintenance dragged on longer than expected. 1 hour stretched to 2. The flight attendants handed out small plastic cups of water and offered snacks to appease disgruntled passengers. Everyone was restless, pacing the aisle and checking the time on their phones. Lucas was incensed. He paced up and down the aisle like a caged animal, occasionally grumbling to anyone who would listen about how ridiculous this was and how incompetent he believed the airline staff to be. At around the 2.5-hour mark on the ground, the pilot made an announcement. "We appreciate your patience. We're waiting on a final clearance from the maintenance team. Once we have that, we'll be on our way to Los Angeles. We understand this is an inconvenience, and we thank you for your cooperation." A murmur of relief went through the cabin. People began returning to their seats, buckling up, hopeful that they'd soon be airborne. Alicia prepared herself mentally for the possibility that she'd miss some part of the conference schedule. Yet, she reminded herself that traveling was always a gamble. At least she was safe. Lucas, however, couldn't let it go. This was a personal affront, as though the delay was specifically orchestrated to undermine his career prospects. He waited until the flight attendant, Rebecca, was briefly alone. Then he cornered her again, this time with a lowered but venomous voice. "You and your crew are incompetent," he spat. "If you'd upgraded me to first class or done something earlier, maybe none of this would be happening. But no, you're busy catering to people who don't even belong here." His gaze flicked toward Alicia's seat again. "This is the worst service I've ever experienced." Rebecca's face went red, but she maintained her composure. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to refrain from speaking to me or my colleagues in that manner. If you continue, we'll have to ask you to leave the aircraft." Lucas let out a short, scornful laugh. "Ask me to leave? We're stuck in some middle-of-nowhere gate in Street Louis. Where exactly do you expect me to go?" Rebecca's lips tightened. She said nothing further and returned to her duties. But an ominous silence settled over her expression, like someone who knew that there was a protocol for belligerent passengers and that Lucas was perilously close to crossing the line. Finally, An announcement came through that they had been cleared to resume their journey. The door closed and the plane began to taxi away from the remote gate. Alicia felt a small rush of relief, as did many others, and she took out her phone one last time to send a quick text, hoping to salvage some part of her conference plan. Yet, no sooner had they started moving than Lucas decided to push his luck further. He rose from his seat again, ignoring the seatbelt sign, and stormed up the aisle. A flight attendant called out, "Sir, you need to sit down immediately." But Lucas marched toward Alicia's row. He pointed a finger at her, as though she had personally orchestrated this fiasco. "This all started the moment I tried to get away from you," he hissed. "I should never have had to switch seats in the first place." "You're nothing but trouble." Alicia felt her ears burn, her heart rate spike. The entire row, and several rows behind and ahead, turned to stare at this unfolding scene. She felt her throat tighten. She wanted to speak up, but shock pinned her voice down. Her fingers clutched the hardcover book on her lap, almost as if it could shield her from his hateful words. A flight attendant rushed toward Lucas. "Sit down now," she repeated with urgency. "We're in motion. You're endangering the cabin." Lucas ignored her. "This plane would have taken off on time if you and your incompetent staff had done your jobs," he hurled at the attendant, and then he turned to Alicia. "And if you weren't hogging that seat in my row, none of this." That was the final straw. With the seatbelt sign illuminated and Lucas ignoring direct instructions, the flight attendant looked at the captain in the cockpit, who was peering through the open door. Captain Davies stood, removed his hat, and walked down the aisle. His face was stern, eyes narrowed in a silent fury. "Sir," the captain said, in a controlled but furious voice, "you are disobeying crew instructions. You are harassing a fellow passenger. This is not negotiable. You need to return to your seat immediately." Lucas opened his mouth to protest, but something in the captain's gaze silenced him momentarily. Passengers turned away uncomfortably, not wanting to be part of the altercation, but unable to ignore it. Alicia blinked back tears of anger, refusing to look away. She held Lucas's gaze, letting him see she was not cowed. Finally, Lucas sneered, "Fine." He spun around and stomped toward the rear of the plane, hitting shoulders with a few other travelers in his haste. The plane came to a halt. The pilot conferred with the crew. Over the intercom, Captain Davies announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a disruption on board, we must return to the gate for passenger safety." The collective groan of the passengers echoed, but a quiet consensus also emerged. Lucas had gone too far. Even if it meant another delay, many silently agreed that removing him was necessary. The plane taxied back to the same remote gate. Outside the window, Alysia could see an airport security vehicle approaching. She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. She felt a mix of emotions: anger, embarrassment, relief. She never asked for any of this. All she wanted was to travel in peace. When the door opened again, 2 uniformed airport security officers stepped aboard. Lucas had returned to seat 29D, arms folded, face twisted in a scowl. Rebecca pointed him out to the officers. One of them approached him and spoke in a low, firm voice, instructing Lucas to gather his belongings and leave the aircraft. For a moment, Lucas refused. "You can't do this. I paid for this flight." "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," he bluffed. But the officers were unmoved. They repeated the instruction, emphasizing that continuing to resist would lead to arrest. Finally, Lucas grabbed his briefcase. His face burned red, whether from rage, humiliation, or both. As he made his way up the aisle, passengers shrank away from him, as though he carried a contagious affliction. He shot a look at Alicia, who met his gaze head-on. His voice was caught in his throat, so no words came out. In that tense silence, something in her expression told him, "You brought this on yourself." He was escorted off the plane, down the stairway onto the tarmac. The passengers inside watched from the circular windows as he was guided away. The door closed once more. There was a hush in the cabin, broken only by whispers of relief and astonishment. With Lucas gone, the captain announced that it might take a few minutes to finalize paperwork, and then they would take off again. The flight attendants apologized for the inconvenience. Alysia felt an unexpected wave of guilt. She hated that anyone had to face such tension because of her presence. But deep down, she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. If anything, she was the victim in this situation. She squeezed her eyes shut, letting the flight's white noise drown out the echoes of his hateful words. At last, the plane took off, climbing into a crimson sky lit by a setting sun. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight settled into cruising altitude again. Some passengers who had witnessed the incident exchanged a few sympathetic words with Alysia in passing. One flight attendant offered her a complimentary drink. She accepted a soda with a quiet nod of thanks. Without Lucas, the atmosphere in the cabin was lighter. Conversations resumed. Children laughed. Couples dozed off on each other's shoulders. Alysia checked her watch, mentally calculating the time she'd arrive in Los Angeles. She'd miss the opening of the conference, but at least she'd make the latter sessions and still have time to network. Resolving to let go of the unpleasantness, she opened her child psychology book again, determined to reclaim the peace that had been so rudely snatched from her. Meanwhile, Lucas found himself on the tarmac of Street Louis Lambert International Airport. The roar of jet engines and the swirl of dust and grit all around him. The security officers escorted him into a small, functional building near the remote gates, where airline representatives typically handle unscheduled stops or special circumstances. The humidity hit him first. It was a warm evening in Street Louis, the air thick and sticky. Inside that small building, there was no plush lounge seating, no crowd of travelers. Just a couple of wooden chairs, a soda vending machine, and an airline representative behind a makeshift desk. Still seething with anger, Lucas tried to assert his dominance, barking at the representative that he had been wronged. He demanded rebooking, compensation, an apology, anything to soothe his bruised ego. The representative, a middle-aged man named Carl, listened patiently as Lucas ranted. Then he calmly explained the situation. Lucas had been removed from the flight for refusing to comply with crew instructions and for harassing a fellow passenger. According to Delta Airlines policy, he would need to book another flight at his own expense because his behavior had violated the airline's conduct rules. "That's outrageous," Lucas roared. "I am a paying customer. I was discriminated against. She was making me uncomfortable, and your staff took her side." Carl frowned, leafing through some paperwork. "Sir, from the documentation I have, it was you who refused to sit next to a passenger without valid reason, and you continued to cause a disturbance that forced the plane to return to the gate. The airline can refuse service in such cases." Lucas felt the anger rising in his throat. He wanted to lash out, to blame someone, but the rational part of his mind finally realized he'd boxed himself into a corner. Carl simply stared at him. "I can help you with alternate travel plans, but you'll have to bear the cost of a new ticket. If you choose not to rebook with Delta, you may try another airline, but they'll likely have similar policies and might even be notified about this incident if they check your record." Lucas's face contorted with rage, but he recognized he had little choice. His dream job interview was in Los Angeles, and he couldn't just skip it. He'd have to swallow his pride, open his wallet, and hope for the best. With a sour expression, he grudgingly agreed to look at rebooking options. Hours passed. The next Delta flight out of Street Louis to Los Angeles was fully booked. Lucas demanded Carl check other carriers, only to find that the earliest flight he could catch was a red-eye departing well after midnight, and it came with a hefty price tag that stung Lucas's pride further. He was forced to wait in the quiet building, accompanied only by the vending machine's incessant hum. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Lucas felt hunger gnawing at his stomach. He rummaged through his briefcase, but found nothing but some breath mints. There was nowhere to buy a proper meal without going through security into the main terminals. And ironically, that required a boarding pass he didn't yet have. By the time he secured his new flight, the airport's main shops and restaurants would be closed. Eventually, Carl returned. "I managed to put you on a flight with a connection in Denver. You'll get to LAX around 9 a.m., he said. It's the soonest I could find." Lucas's heart sank. His meeting was at 8:30 a.m. in downtown Los Angeles. By the time he'd land, collect his baggage, and fight through la traffic, the best he could do might be 10:30 a.m., a full 2 hours late. The entire interview might be doomed. "Fine," Lucas spat. "Book it. I have no other choice." He slapped his credit card down onto the makeshift desk. Carl typed furiously, handing Lucas a printed itinerary. "Gate 12 in the main terminal. Security lines might be short at this hour, but I suggest you go as soon as possible," he advised. Lucas grabbed the paper without a word. He made his way to the shuttle that would take him from the remote gate area to the main terminal. As he stepped out of the building into the night air, he realized how alone he felt. No staff fussing over him, no peers to impress, just a man weighed down by a briefcase and a battered pride. As the shuttle carried him to the terminal, Lucas's phone buzzed. The HR manager from the tech firm in La had sent him an email reminding him of the final interview schedule and the importance of timeliness. The seat next to Lucas was empty, the shuttle's interior lights flickering. He read the email, feeling a sense of dread. Even if he explained his flight delay, would they show leniency? Possibly not. This was a highly competitive position, and the slightest misstep could cost him dearly. He typed a reply, a hurried explanation about unexpected delays, omitting the truth about his own behavior. He tried to keep his tone apologetic but confident, hoping they might accommodate a slight delay in start time. However, part of him knew that tech companies valued punctuality and professionalism. First impressions were everything. Arriving at the main terminal, Lucas went through security slowly, grudgingly. His suit was wrinkled now, his tie askew. He tried to freshen up in a public restroom, dabbing water on his face. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he examined himself in the mirror. A wave of shame washed over him, though he tried to push it away. This was never his fault, he told himself. They made him act this way. But that small, persistent voice in the back of his head told him otherwise. Alicia's flight made it to Los Angeles at around 11 p.m. local time, much later than initially planned. Exhausted, Alysia gathered her luggage and stepped out into the mild California night. She booked a rideshare to her hotel, her mind replaying the ordeal. She wasn't naive. She knew these types of incidents still happened. Yet, to experience it so openly on a plane shook her confidence. Once at her hotel, Alysia took a long shower, letting the water wash away the fatigue and tension. She reminded herself that she was here for a purpose, the pediatric health conference. She hung up her outfit for the next day, checked the conference schedule, and realized she would miss the early morning session. With a heavy sigh, she set her alarm, determined to attend the afternoon seminars. Life goes on, she reminded herself. Don't let one hateful man steal your joy. Lucas's grueling journey eventually landed him in Los Angeles around 9:15 a.m. local time, almost a full hour after the start of his scheduled interview. He wrestled with the crowd at baggage claim, nearly tripping over a child who ran past him. He cursed under his breath. He had no time for a rideshare if he wanted even a slim chance of making the tail end of his meeting. So he jumped into the first taxi he could find, ignoring the driver's polite greeting, downtown Redwood Towers, as fast as you can, he barked. The driver nodded, merging onto the freeway. LA traffic was in its usual state of chaos. Every minute seemed like 10, and Lucas felt the tension coil in his chest. He glanced at his watch repeatedly, but each time the minutes ticked by, his heart sank further. He finally arrived at Redwood Towers at 10:45 a.m., nearly 2.5 hours late. He rushed into the gleaming lobby, found the elevator, and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. His reflection in the stainless steel elevator doors showed a harried, sweating man with dark circles under his eyes and a tie undone. Hardly the picture of a confident executive candidate. When he reached the reception desk, the HR manager, Lisa Fan, looked up, startled. "Mr. Henderson?" she asked in disbelief. "We assumed you weren't coming." Lucas forced a breathless smile. "I had some unfortunate flight issues. I emailed you. Could we still do the interview?" Lisa frowned. "I'm so sorry, but the team had a very tight schedule. They concluded interviews already, and most of the panel have left for another engagement. We tried calling you, but your phone must have been off during your flight. The best I can do is ask if they can reschedule, but to be frank, their decision was time-sensitive. They needed someone immediately." Lucas felt the weight of failure slam into him. He had spent months preparing for this moment, researching the company, perfecting his pitch, building up a sense of entitlement that he was destined for this role. And now it slipped through his fingers like sand. He tried one last time. "Please, I can explain." Lisa shook her head sympathetically. "I understand, but the final decision has already been made." They felt it necessary to move forward with another candidate who was here on time this morning. "I'll keep your information on file, but at this point," her voice trailed off. The meaning was clear. In stunned silence, Lucas thanked her and turned on his heel. He walked back into the elevator, each floor's descent feeling like a hammer blow to his chest. It was over. The job he was so sure he deserved was gone, and all he had to show for it was a massive flight expense, a soiled reputation with Delta, and a fiasco that left him alone on a tarmac in Street Louis. While Lucas's world seemed to be crumbling, Alicia arrived at the pediatric conference for the afternoon sessions. Though she was still shaken by the flight's events, she tried to push it aside, immersing herself in workshops on child psychology, new developments in treating chronic conditions, and the importance of empathy in pediatric care. Her naturally warm personality and genuine passion for her work quickly drew colleagues to her. She found herself invited to small group discussions, and a speaker even asked if Alysia might share some insights from her experience as a pediatric nurse. Despite the rocky start, Alysia was thriving. She realized that no matter what negativity she faced, she had the power to turn her focus back to what truly mattered, helping children heal and grow. A few new acquaintances decided to grab coffee together in the conference center's lounge. Alicia joined them, laughing at jokes, exchanging contact info. Even with the lingering hurt from the flight, she felt renewed. These people saw her talent, her intelligence, her heart, and that overshadowed any ignorance she'd encountered the day before. Later that afternoon, Alicia got an unexpected email from the hospital director back home. A new position had opened up, a role that involved coordinating pediatric outreach programs across multiple clinics. It was a significant promotion. Her director had heard about Alysia's ongoing research and recognized her potential. If she was interested, they'd schedule an interview upon her return. Her hands shook with excitement. This was a dream opportunity, aligning perfectly with her passion. She stared at the phone screen, her mind buzzing with gratitude and possibility. In that moment, the bitterness of the flight incident felt like a faraway cloud, overshadowed by the bright sun of progress and recognition. Lucas, on the other hand, dragged his luggage down a busy L.A. street. He had nowhere in particular to go now. The reason for his trip was gone. Checking into his booked hotel felt meaningless. He was too angry to rest, too drained to think straight. Out of habit, he checked his phone. He posted a furious rant on social media about Delta Airlines, the incompetent staff, and forced diversity. He expected sympathy and solidarity from his circle. Instead, his post was met with silence or rebukes from former acquaintances who called out his blatant prejudice. He tried contacting a few headhunters he knew in LA, hoping to line up last-minute interviews. Most were polite but non-committal, citing that roles at his level typically required careful scheduling. One asked, "What happened with your flight? I heard some rumor you caused a disturbance." Word had spread, it seemed, and not in a way that benefited him. Lucas felt cornered. His frustration manifested in a meltdown at the hotel check-in desk, where he berated a young clerk for not finding his reservation immediately. Another manager overheard and warned him to calm down or be asked to leave. Realizing he was close to being kicked out of yet another place, Lucas forced himself to quiet down. Later that evening, he sat alone in his hotel room, staring at the city lights through the window. His mind drifted back to the plane, to Alicia's calm demeanor, to the flight attendant's unwavering refusal to accommodate his prejudices, to the moment the pilot's stern gaze shut him down. He felt an unfamiliar pang in his chest. Shame. Had it been worth it? The question echoed in his mind. All that hatred, all that arrogance, what good had it done him? He was jobless, humiliated, and out thousands of dollars in last-minute flight changes. In a moment of rare self-reflection, Lucas wondered if this was a wake-up call, a moment of karmic retribution that demanded he change or face further ruin. 2 days later, Alicia's conference ended on a high note. She'd made valuable connections and was filled with new ideas to bring back to her hospital. She boarded her return flight, ironically also on Delta, without incident. She was even upgraded to an aisle seat near the front, thanks to some leftover voucher from the airline's attempt to apologize for the previous flight drama. She smiled to herself, realizing how small gestures of kindness can go a long way. Lucas, meanwhile, lingered in Los Angeles, half-heartedly searching for job leads, but mostly wallowing in his own frustration. Each time he tried to leverage his old confidence to impress a potential employer, he stumbled. The ghost of that flight incident loomed over him. He had also started receiving heated comments on social media from acquaintances disapproving of his rant. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he called his older sister, a more open-minded person who had tried to steer him away from prejudice in the past. He told her, in truncated form, what had happened. She chastised him for his behavior, reminding him that their parents had raised them better. It hurt to hear her speak those words, but a part of him knew she was right. When Lucas finally booked a return flight, ironically also on Delta because it was the cheapest he could find, at short notice, he was placed on a no-frills basic economy seat, middle seat, last row, next to the lavatory, reminiscent of his humiliating placement before. He boarded quietly, wearing casual clothes, no suit and tie this time. He kept his head down, anxious not to draw any attention. Every so often, he replayed the earlier incident in his mind, the moment he demanded not to sit next to Alicia, the surge of anger that followed, and how it all led to his removal and the eventual collapse of his carefully laid plans. He hadn't magically become a new person overnight, but he felt the stirrings of regret, a recognition that his prejudice and sense of entitlement had done him no favors. As the flight took off, Lucas found himself seated next to two strangers, a Hispanic college student and an older Korean woman. They chatted with each other in broken English, exchanging stories about their journeys. Lucas listened, feeling oddly drawn to their warmth. Nobody was giving him the side eye or ignoring him. For once, he felt an urge to join in, maybe even to connect on some basic human level. Back home, Alicia resumed her nursing duties, brimming with fresh insights. She scheduled her interview for the pediatric outreach coordinator position. Her supervisors were excited about the possibility of her stepping into a leadership role. Despite the unpleasant memory of the flight, she realized how many good things were happening in her life. She told a few close friends about the incident, and they supported her wholeheartedly, praising her for staying composed amid adversity. A few weeks later, Alicia received word that she'd been selected for the new position. It was official. She was about to embark on the next phase of her career, one that would allow her to help even more children and families. She celebrated with colleagues, family, and friends. The bitterness of Lucas's racism faded further into the background of her life story, just one of many obstacles she had overcome. Lucas, on the other hand, had to endure the fallout of losing that lucrative job opportunity in LA. His finances took a hit, and word of his meltdown on the plane spread in professional circles through whisper networks. He's difficult to work with, some said. He lacks emotional intelligence, others remarked. The tech firm in LA had shared feedback with recruiting agencies, making it clear that an unprofessional meltdown cost him the role. In those difficult months, as job rejections piled up, Lucas found himself at a moral crossroads. Change was painful. Admitting you're wrong is never easy. Yet, the reality was that his prejudice had become an obstacle, not just ethically, but practically. If he wanted to succeed, he needed to unlearn those toxic beliefs and learn empathy and respect values that the modern workplace demands. Months later, in a twist of fate, Lucas took a part-time consulting role at a mid-sized company in his city. It was far from the executive position he once coveted, but it was a foot in the door. His new manager, Tristan, was a black man in his late 40s, highly educated, warm, and a believer in second chances. On Lucas's first day, Tristan extended a hand and said, "Welcome aboard. We work hard here, but we also believe in supporting each other. If you have any questions, let me know." Lucas felt a swirl of shame and relief. Here was someone offering him an opportunity at a time when he felt undeserving. Initially, Lucas was distant, unsure how to navigate the guilt he felt around his past behavior. But over time, Tristan's mentorship began to chip away at Lucas's defenses. He slowly realized how wrong he had been in his assumptions about people of color. They had more in common than he had ever allowed himself to believe: ambition, family values, the desire for respect and success. Alicia, meanwhile, excelled in her new role, traveling between clinics to implement outreach programs. She occasionally thought back to that flight from JFK. It no longer triggered the same anger. It was a reminder of how far she'd come and how vital it was to stay true to her own dignity and professionalism. Lucas, in his own way, started to grow. He hadn't become an overnight social justice warrior, but he was learning to question his biases. He didn't see Alicia again, but the memory of her poised calm on that plane, contrasted with his own meltdown, became a symbolic milestone. It represented the moment he reached rock bottom, forced to confront an ugliness in himself that he could no longer deny. He worked under Tristan's guidance for a year, gradually earning more responsibility. For the first time, he began to understand what it meant to respect people for their character and talents, rather than judging them by superficial traits. And in turn, his professional reputation started to rebuild. A few people even reached out, saying they'd heard he was doing better, that he seemed like a changed man. He wasn't there yet, but he was on the path, shaped by his downfall on that tarmac in Street Louis. Months turned to years. Alicia's outreach program grew, and she became an influential figure in pediatric nursing circles, known for her empathy, her intellect, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Lucas, chastened by the memory of his humiliation and guided by good mentors, found steady footing in his career again. Though he never regained the same fast-track velocity he once had, he found a deeper sense of fulfillment and a more genuine respect for others. In the end, the incident on Flight 487 was a turning point in both lives, a moment of cruelty and bigotry transformed into a lesson about human dignity and empathy. Alicia soared higher in her profession, proving that no hateful encounter could derail her destiny. Lucas stumbled, fell hard, and eventually got back up, albeit changed. The tarmac where he once stood alone and ashamed served as a reminder that life doesn't cater to your prejudices, and when you try to make it bend to them, you risk being left behind while everyone else moves forward. Thank you for watching this tale of tension, transformation, and the raw consequences of letting prejudice guide our actions. We saw how one man's refusal to simply share a seat with another human being snowballed into a life-altering downfall, and we witnessed how the same encounter propelled someone else toward unexpected triumph. It's a powerful reminder that empathy, respect, and open-mindedness can turn the most challenging moments into pathways of growth. If you found this story engaging or thought-provoking, please like this video, share it with friends and family who could use the reminder that we're all on this journey together, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that dive into the heart of human nature. Your support and feedback mean the world, so let's keep the conversation going, spread the message, and stay tuned for our next story.